Hello, creative coders. This is day 2 of week 1, and today is going to be a busy day. Yesterday, you got started by setting up a Discord account and completing the instructions exercise. Today, you're going to be working with GitHub, learning some more HTML and CSS, and then hopefully completing the ransom letter exercise. It's going to be a lot. So, in general, this is where we're headed. So, you're going to be publishing a repository as a web page. That's your goal for today. But to get there, you're going to first have to clone my repository so you have some code to work with. To do that, you're going to need GitHub Desktop, and there are some prerequisites even before that. So there's quite a bit here. I've got this all written up already in Canvas step by step, but I'm doing this video to take you through those steps in a demonstrative kind of way because sometimes that's easier. I'm going to move kind of quickly because with the video you can always pause it, and I'm going to try to break it up into sections so you can jump to the spot you need if you're having problems with a particular part of it. And of course, you can always ask for help on Discord if you get stuck with something. So let's get started. Even though this isn't a class strictly about web development, it makes sense to think about how you interact with the web because a lot of the projects you're going to be doing are JavaScript based, and JavaScript is a language that exists on the web, and you'll be sharing these things through a web page. That's the whole premise of what you're going to be setting up today. So in order to access this stuff consistently, I recommend using a good web browser, and for me that's Chrome or Firefox. I've been using Firefox a lot more recently than Chrome. It's going to give you more consistent access to some development tools that are built into the web browser. So just to be clear, I do not recommend Safari or whatever Microsoft's thing is called now. Those are a bit more polished. They also hide certain information from you that you actually need in order to understand what you're doing when you create content for the web. So it's important that you use a web browser that gives you access to those things. Chrome is good. That's what this is here. It's not much of a visual for this page. This is Chrome. And then, like I said, I also use Firefox mostly for my actual work. They're different, but they have a similar set of tools. And the main set of tools that I'm talking about are the development tools. You won't be able to see this when I right click because it's not being captured, but there's a right click and then inspect element that will pop up this set of tools at the bottom. And these are useful ways to debug something that's going on in your web browser, specifically the console, because we're going to be doing so much in JavaScript with this class. The console is where you can see JavaScript errors. You can also write JavaScript code and see what it does if you want to do that as you're learning JavaScript, right? So, well, if I can get it typed. That's a basic little JavaScript command there. So these are some things that are going to be a lot easier for you to access if you're using a good browser. You're going to be working a lot with files on your computer as you code for this class, and so it's important to make sure that your computer is telling you everything that you need to know about some of these files. What I've got right here is a display of a folder on my Windows computer. This is Windows 10. If you have Windows 11, it'll look slightly different, but the concept that I'm about to show you is the same, and that has to do with the names of these files. So you can see this file here that's called index. That's actually not the file's full name. There's something else on that file called a file extension, which appears after a dot. The full name of this file is actually index.html. So to make sure I can see that, this is what I recommend you do. So this is, again, Windows 10 is a different process for Windows 11, but I think it's similar. So you go to Home, Share, View, look through the tabs for the different options here, and look for this option that says File Name Extensions. Check the link there, check the box there, rather, and you can now see that index.html is now the complete name of this file. It's actually visible. Also, I already had this one checked, showing hidden items. That's less important, I think, but that's something I also like to be able to see. Now, this process will be different on a Mac, obviously, but most of you are using Windows, I think, according to the survey that I sent out, and I'm recording this on Windows, so that's easier. I put a link to how to do this in the notes for today, but if you look at, I can also just tell you what to do. So on a Mac, you click on the Finder, so that's like that guy with the face icon, and then you go to the Finder menu and select Preferences, and then in the Finder Preferences, there are 4 tabs: General, Tabs, Sidebar, and Advanced. Click on the Advanced tab, and then there's the box at the top that says Show All File Name Extensions. So that's how it works on my Mac. I'm using Mac OS Monterey, so that's probably very similar even if you have a slightly different version of the Mac OS. So that's really important. Again, make sure that you can see file extensions. All right, so we're using GitHub for this class, basically every project and exercise after this, and GitHub is a web-based platform for Git. Git is version control software that keeps track of different versions of something that you're working on, and it's a free thing, so sign up for it. Go to github.com. I already have an account, so I'm going to sign into mine, but in your case, when you sign up, of course, you would create an account. It's free, and then this is what it looks like when you're logged in. It has kind of a social media sense to it where you can follow people and see their stuff. So these are people that I follow, and you can see what they've been doing recently. You also have a profile on here where you can see, where you can look at someone else's profile and you can see what they've been up to. So I have a bunch of repositories here, and you can see my activity here. I don't use GitHub that much, to be honest, but you can see my activity over the last year at a glance with this little grid view. You can see I've been very busy over the last few days, and also back in November. So that's GitHub. Again, it's a free account. Sign up for it, github.com. I want you to take a look at this folder. This is not code, this is something I'm writing, and as you can see, I've done kind of a bad job of keeping track of these. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 copies of what look like the same thing in different states. And notice what I've done with some of these names. I've got chapter 1, chapter 2, but then I've got copy of chapter 1, and then in parentheses, this is the old version, and this is the RE version, and I've got all these little labels to keep track of it. I think I remember which one is the current version of this, but I think that in a few weeks, or I probably will forget. So basically, I've done a bad job of keeping track of which version of this is the current correct version of it. Sometimes it's useful to make multiple copies because maybe, let's say I want to try something different in terms of organization, and so I want to save the original one in case that thing I tried doesn't work out. But the way I've labeled this here doesn't really make that clear. Git is software that lets you explicitly label things like that and keep track of versions and also recognize which is the current version, which are the previous versions. You can switch back to previous versions back and forth very easily. So that's the purpose of that within a code project. But in order to do that, there's a lot of terminology that comes with Git and GitHub. And so I just want to go through some of these definitions. We're not going to use all these concepts, but I will sometimes use these terms when I'm talking about what you're doing. So just a quick definition I thought would be helpful. First of all, a repository or a repo is basically a directory, a chunk of code, a folder. And in this case, it's going to be a folder with lots of subfolders in it that have individual templates set up for different projects. So that's what we're talking about here. I've created a repository or a repo. You're going to clone my repo so that you have a copy of it. So that's what cloning means, which is making a copy. As you work, you have to commit changes to that repository. Committing is kind of like saving, but it's like more so. So as you're working just kind of line by line, it's a good idea to save, preview things, see how it looks. But then once you're happy with whatever the changes are, or once you're done with the project that you are working on, you commit those changes to the repository. So it's kind of like a super save, just to kind of say, yes, I really mean this. This is something that I feel like is ready to show to someone else. Diff is a concept that lets you see the differences between two different versions of something, and then so diff just is short for difference. Once you've committed it, you then have to push it to the main, and so that's going to be taking those saved changes, committing to them, and then sharing them in the public version of your repository. The way we're going to do this, your public repository is also going to create a web page, so it's going to be several steps there. So save, commit, push. That's your basic workflow as you do these things. A couple other things that we aren't going to be using. Forking is a term you'll see on GitHub, and you can see it whenever you view a specific repository. This is the repository you'll be copying. You might see the concept of forking. It's up here on the right. You don't need to fork my project. Forking means I'm going to make a different version of this project so I can try to change something, and then if you try to change that thing and submit it back to me, the original owner of this repository, I can pull your changes into my code if I agree with them. GitHub is built to support open source software development, so there's a lot of that kind of pushing and pulling and forking on GitHub for most repositories. In your case, though, you probably won't be using those features. So that's some basic GitHub terminology. Remember how I said it's important to know what kind of file you're working on. Your computer knows what kind of file a file is by the file extension, and HTML is one of the types of files that we're going to be working on. It is important to use the right software to edit these files, because if you use the wrong software, it'll create problems. essentially an HTML file is a plain text document, but it has code in it. So it's a good idea to use a special kind of software called a code editor. And there's a bunch of these. They're basically just they're software that can edit plain text, but that understand that you might be editing code. So they add a fair number of kind of bells and whistles to do that. So this is my index.html file. I can open this just by default. I'm using Windows here, of course. If I open it just by default in Firefox, that's what I'm going to see as the HTML of this. But of course, we're dealing with code. So what we want to do is actually edit this. And I've got a few options on my computer already, and I can recommend these to you. A lot of people like VS Code, or it's Microsoft Visual Studio. It's a free software you can install if you have a Windows computer, and this is what it looks like. I'm like not used to using it. It has a lot of bells and whistles that I don't need, so I don't actually like using it myself, but a lot of people do, and that's totally fine if you want to use it or if you already have been using it. What you can see here is that this is text. It's plain text that I can edit, but it's very similar to the kind of editing that you've probably already seen in Codecademy, or maybe you've used the code editor in cPanel on UMW domains. It's got color syntax highlighting to tell you what kinds of things, to visually tell you what you're looking at when you're editing the code. And the default theme here is kind of like a blue on black. I think this is the default theme. I might have changed it. I personally prefer Sublime Text. This is a personal preference. It's not a requirement that you use Sublime Text. But it opened over there on my other monitor. This is what it looks like. I just think it's a cleaner looking interface. It has a lot of the same bells and whistles in terms of functions that help you write code. The main thing is the syntax highlighting, because I can see that this is HTML. I can tell my HTML is correct because everything is colored the way it's supposed to be, and this is HTML. So whatever you want to use, I think VS Code is good. I think Sublime Text is good. Atom, BB Edit. There's a ton of others probably at this point, but something that's clearly labeled as a code editor is something that I would recommend. These are all free downloads. You can find them if you Google for them, but I definitely recommend it. Okay, so that's the final prerequisite step. We are now finally ready for step one. So GitHub, as you now know, is a website for hosting repositories of code, and when you are accessing it online, github.com, mostly what you're doing is exploring other people's code and looking at their code and trying to learn from it. This is the repository that you're going to be copying in a moment, but that's basically all you can do on github.com. You can't really code on github.com. It's there for sharing. You can't really produce or even manage projects very much just using the web interface. Instead, what we should be using, what you can use, is this software here, which is called GitHub Desktop. And this is what it looks like. I've already got it installed, obviously, as you can see here. But you can get it if you don't already have it by going to desktop.github.com. I think that's right. Let's see. Yeah, here it is. So make sure you download the correct version. That will probably be up here by default with the button. So click that and go ahead and download it. This is Windows, obviously, 64-bit, so that's probably what you have as well. Go ahead and download that. When you first download it, I actually don't remember. I think it tries to get you to set up a repository just as part of the setup process, but you can skip that. You don't need to do that because you're going to be cloning My Repository instead. But this is GitHub Desktop. Not much to see here yet. I'm going to show you how to clone the repository next, and then we'll be able to do some things with the desktop client. All right, it's finally time to set up a place to work on your computer to actually do these things and get some coding done. So first of all, I'd recommend setting up a specific directory to hold this repository and any other projects you work on related to this class or whatever this summer. So that folder can be anywhere. It can be in your documents somewhere. It can be on your desktops. Just make a new folder, whatever you like to do, just so you can find it. Make sure it's something that you can find easily using whatever method you'd like to use to find files, by double-clicking things, by browsing to things, or just putting it on your desktop. All right, so now we are going to, your next step is to actually clone my repository. So this is my repository. The link is in the notes. It's github.com/ZachWhalen/creative-coding. Now, I can't actually clone my own repository, so I'm going to find another one to clone so I can show you kind of what that looks like. But of course, you'll be doing this with mine. Let's see what Alison Parrish is up to. So this is someone who does a lot of cool projects, Alison Parrish, and mesmerizing. Okay, I don't know what this library is, but it looks kind of interesting. So what you do when you find an interesting repository that you want to clone, this is how you do it, and this is what you will do with mine. I'm doing this with Allison's repository. You do this with my repository. And what you're looking for is this green code button over here. So click the code button, and you've got 3 tabs here. Make sure you're on HTTPS, and then where it says open with GitHub Desktop, just go ahead and click that link. You may get this thing requesting permission to open it in GitHub Desktop. Go ahead and accept that, and then you'll see that it pops up into GitHub Desktop. Now I'll go ahead and hide Firefox so you can see just GitHub Desktop by itself. And you can see it's asking me a few things. So first of all, it's just double checking. Is this the repository that you want to clone? The answer is yes. In my case, it's aparish/besmerizing. In your case, it'll be Zach Whalen/creative coding. And then where it says local path, this is where you need to choose where you want this repository to end up on your computer. So remember when I said to set up a folder for things on this for this class, this is where you're doing that. Where it says choose, click on choose, and then browse to that folder that you created. So maybe that's on your desktop. Maybe it's wherever, wherever you've already done that. Just make sure that you know where it is. Select that, and then actually I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to actually do this. So I'm going to put this in here in my PG folder, and then I'm going to hit clone, and then you'll see something similar to what just happened there. What is happening is that it's downloading all those files onto my computer, and now they're here. I can click on this Show and Explorer just to verify that those are the files I wanted. I can see it in my File Explorer, and that's where I wanted them to go. And yeah, there they are. Those are all the code projects, all the files necessary for this particular project by Allison Parrish. So that's what you do to clone my repository. One more thing I should probably mention, once you've cloned my repository and you've accessed all those files in the File Explorer, you should take a minute and look around and see what I've got here. What you will see is that I've got files organized week by week, week 1, week 2, 3, 4, and 5. Week 5 is kind of empty because that's going to be your final project, but week 1 has folders for the projects for the week, including the ransom letter, concrete manifesto, the rebranding one, and then the self-portrait, which is the project. The other 2 are exercises, and then this is an optional, rebranding is an optional exercise. The instructions exercise doesn't have anything code to create, so that's not going to apply here. The idea is that you'll do some work in these different places, and then you'll be able to share and publish them. So take a minute, look around. Don't change anything yet. Don't change any of my folder names at least, but you will be changing a lot of things in the code itself, which is the whole idea. So that's the next step. Okay, it's finally time to make some changes to actually do some coding and see how this workflow really works. So this is my index.html file. As you know, this is what it looks like here, and I want to make a change to it. I want you to make a change to it. So I'm going to open this in Sublime Text, which is my code editor of choice. I'll bring that window over here so you can see it. And what I'd like for you to do is change some text here. I'm going to just go ahead and change this to, this is not just a web page, not just a paragraph, this is a web page. So I will save my changes here, file save, or Control S, just save it as the same thing. And then I'm going to go over here to GitHub Desktop and check out what happened here. Before it was just on the default home screen, but now that home screen has changed to something else. I've got my creative coding repository selected, and you can see that it popped up with a diff. So this is saying that, hey, this file changed. This is a file called index.html, and it's saying, hey, it used to say this is a paragraph on line 10. Now line 10 says this is a web page. Hopefully you can see that. Okay, it's hard for me to see if I can zoom in. I don't know if I can make that any larger, but that's what it's doing. So this is a change that has been made and applied. So remember the work process. You have to edit, save, and then keep editing and saving until you're happy with it. I can double check that I'm happy with it by refreshing my web browser view and seeing that now it does say this is a web page. I'm just zooming in to make it bigger so you can see that that's the new version. It does look like I want it to look. So I'm happy with these changes. And down here in the left part of the GitHub Desktop client, I'm going to tell, let's just say what I did, changing the text. So a brief description of whatever changes you're doing here. Sometimes it's a bug fix, sometimes it's a new version, something like that. I'm going to then commit it. Remember, committing adds it to the repository and kind of save is like the super save. But let's say, while I'm at it, I maybe I don't like this as a web page. Maybe I want to change this text a little bit. This is really a nice web page. Maybe I want to say it like that. Control S to save it, and then back over here in GitHub Desktop, it's noted that this is changed again, and it actually highlights how the text is different, not just that there's a difference on that line, but here's a part of that line that changed. So I'm just going to say one more tweak and commit that to main. So now I've got two changes saved as commits that are available for me to push to origin, which is the verb used to publish that. So that's going to be the next and I think final step. Okay, so I've got my changes saved and committed to the repository. I'm ready to push this to the public part of my repository. So I'm going to click this button here that says push origin. You can also click this button at the top that has become available because there are now committed changes ready to be pushed. So I'm going to do the pushing here. Push that button here and it does its little thing and then it's done. I'm now in sync. My code on my computer is now in sync with the code available for anyone to access on github.com. So I can just double check that if I want to by looking at that file on github.com. So this is the public version of it. This is what you can see. In fact, this is what you'll see and have on your computer if you clone it before I have a chance to change it back. That's what it's going to look like. So this is this is obviously web page code, but it's not really working yet as a web page. There's one more thing we need to do, and this final thing is actually going to publish my code I've created here as a web page, but this thing at least you don't have to do over and over again. This is something you just have to do once, but it is kind of the final step to do for today in terms of this part of the class. So here's what we do. So go to your repository page. I'm looking at mine, obviously, creative coding. Yours would have your name here on the left and then / creative coding, and just double check that it is, that you're looking at yours and not mine. Then go to settings. So it's this gear icon up on the right. And then down on the left, look for pages. So I notice it's kind of small. Let me make this a little bigger just to help you see it. Look for pages, and there's pages. And mine is already deployed, so you won't see this message when you're visiting here, but what you want to select are the following. So where it says build and deployment, go to select deploy from a branch. And then down here, select the main. Like by default, it'll be on none, but select main. This is the only branch of your project. And then once you do that, it'll pop up with this root option, and then the save option will become available. So that's going to start publishing your repository as a series of web pages. So it sometimes takes a minute or two before you can then double check that it's working. Sometimes it takes 15-20 minutes. One day I remember I was doing this, it took like 12 hours. It's something that actually has to be processed on the server side on GitHub. So sometimes it takes a minute. Don't worry if it seems to be taking a while, but it probably won't take very long at all. And here's what's going to be possible when you're done is when it's done is you'll have access to your site, and it'll tell you with this little message where your site is, but you can also figure it out just by knowing your username on GitHub and then understanding the way that the URL is constructed. So it's going to be, so my name is Zach Whalen, so my username is Zach Whalen. Yours will be your username.github.io/creative coding. That's going to be where your web page is. So I'm going to open it up here, and now you can see that this is the public URL of this web page. It's zachwhalen.github.io/creative coding. This is a really nice web page. This is the now public version that you could access, that I could send you a link to and you could see. This version here is actually the same code, but this is on my computer, and I can tell because I can look at the path in the address bar here of Firefox. It starts with file, and then it addresses a location on my computer, not on the web. So that's my kind of temporary preview copy of it that I can keep here. This is the copy of it that I'm ready for you to see. Same content, right, because they're in sync, but this is now the public version. Ultimately, as you work on the project for this class, this is what you're going to be sharing. And thankfully, this whole process of like getting set up and getting it published as a site, you only have to do that once. And from now on, as you work on the projects, you'll just make the changes you want, commit those changes, push it to origin, and then you'll have a URL that you can share. So that's a process that you'll do over and over again, that you'll get used to. It probably does seem like a lot for now, but it's just something that takes a lot of steps. And like anything, the more you do it, the easier it gets. So hopefully this video doesn't end up being too long, but I've tried to organize it in a way that lets you jump to the parts that you might need to look at multiple times, or you might get stuck on and need some help with. As always, check Discord for any updates or help messages. If you have issues, share those issues and ask for help in Discord. I'm there to help. I'm happy to help. That's what I like to do. So please don't be shy about asking for that help. Also, if you see someone ask a question and you know the answer, go ahead and answer that question for them, because it's a community and we're trying to learn together. So this is the main thing today. The other things that you need to do today include learning a bit more of HTML and CSS in Codecademy, and that's going to be helpful to help prepare you for the ransom letter exercise, which is something I will be working through in today's live stream. Right now it's 10:30 in the morning, so I'm not going live yet, but I will be going live on Twitch later this afternoon. So check Canvas announcement for that schedule. And let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.